Well, hey, hi, what is up? How are you? I hope things are awesome and wonderful wherever you find yourself in the world today. My name is Crystal Sky, and if you're anything like me, you find yourself morbidly drawn to true crime cases. So that's what I talk about here. Oh my gosh, we did it. We uploaded our first video. I think I was more nervous uploading it to YouTube than actually recording it, but we did it. Yay. So I'm so happy that we got our first video in. And of course, already you could see the mistakes. I got the video into Premiere and then I noticed that our lighting situation was not that great. I had a light source that was right here and it was shining right on my face. So it sort of made me look like Two-Face, and it made it look like this side of my face was not blended, which was really terrifying to me because that's always my fear, is that I don't do enough blending. And so it looked all splotchy and stuff. So I did the best I could with color correction, but it's cool, right? That's just the nature of this kind of stuff. You live and you learn. And that's also the benefit of being a nobody on YouTube, is no one's going to watch it. It's fine. It's fine. We also already updated our set a little bit. So several months ago, we were perusing the Halloween clearance at Hobby Lobby, and I came across this guy in this cool little cage. It was on clearance. Like I said, they're Halloween clearance. So yeah, I thought it would be a cool little addition to have a little friend here talking about cases. I don't have a name for him yet, so yeah, what should I name him? I was thinking about, I don't know, maybe something a little ironic, like Fluffy or something like that. Or maybe something just silly, like Ralph or something. I don't know. What should I name him? Let me know. Well, with all of that out of the way, let's get into today's case. Now, today's case is a Hollywood homicide case, and I wanted to cover it because I remember this being one of the first celebrity deaths that, actually bummed me out. I think I shed a few tears. I was around 11 or so when this happened, and yeah, so I just wanted to talk about it. I am, of course, talking about the tragic murder of comedian Phil Hartman. And if you've never heard of Phil Hartman, what are you doing? Go check out his work. He's hilarious. He's done stuff on The Simpsons. He was on a really great TV show that I will be talking about in the case. So look him up. He's so great. And yeah, without further ado, let's get into it. So, my two disclaimers that I give before every video. One, we are talking about true crime here, so, talking about mature content, graphic descriptions of crime scenes. Today's case, has talk of drug use and stuff like that, so be forewarned. Second disclaimer is I am in no way, shape, or form a makeup artist. Doing makeup, it just sort of helps me be on camera. I am so not comfortable on camera, and just doing makeup, doing something with my hands just helps me feel better and concentrate on what I'm doing rather than just, staring at a camera and talking. So believe me, once I get going, it will be very clear that I don't know what I'm doing. All right, well, let's get into it. So, Phil Hartman. He was actually born Philip Edward Hartman with two N's. He later dropped one of the N's. And he was born September 24th, 1948. I really should put my brushes in front of me before I start talking and closing one of my eyes. Anyway, so he's born September 24th, 1948, and he's born in Brantford, Ontario, Canada, which is actually, coincidentally, the birthplace of hockey legend Wayne Gretzky. Little fun fact there. His parents were Marguerite and Rupert Lobig Hartman, and I think Marguerite might have just been a stay-at-home mom, but Rupert was a salesman, and he specialized in building materials. Now, Phil, he had a sibling or two. He was the fourth of 8 children. Yeah, you heard that right. Fourth of 8 children. Oh boy, that gives me anxiety just thinking about that. So he is, fourth of number 8. He's smack dab middle child. And, as such, being such from a large family. They were also devoutly Catholic. Phil, he found it kind of difficult to kind of get that, like, unique, individual, undivided attention that children need, which, I can imagine a house full of 8 children, like, good Lord. Even if he had full-time help, I would imagine it would just be nearly impossible to give each child all the attention they deserve and need, right? Well, as such, Phil just, that's when he started to become more, like, outgoing at school and kind of being like the class clown. Phil has said, quote, "I suppose I didn't get what I wanted out of my family life, so I started seeking love and attention elsewhere." Now, when Phil was 10 years old, his family immigrated to the United States. They lived in Lewiston, Maine, and then Meriden, Connecticut, before finally settling on the West Coast in, you guessed it, Los Angeles. And when Phil was in junior high, he, like I said, was, started to become like the class clown. He loved making people laugh. He was very outgoing, and he was also very artistic. He actually joined the drama club at school, and he was in several plays in junior high. And he would actually share the stage with someone else who would become famous in their own right. He went to school and shared the stage with none other than Lynette Squeaky Fromm. Yeah, that Squeaky Fromm. Again, another little fun fact for you. So Phil attended Westchester High School, and there he was voted, class clown. Like I said, he was like that guy, the funny guy, and, he was just living his best Southern California life, he had like the long hair and the tan. He loved the outdoors. He really loved surfing and, also partaking in, a little bit of the devil's lettuce, as it were, so he was just described as being sort of that quintessential Southern California boy, all right? Now, after high school, he attended Santa Monica City College, and there he dabbled in, like, drawing. He was very artistic and, really talented. However, he dropped out of college in 1969 to, get this, be a roadie for a rock band. Yeah. So his brother worked in the music industry, and he actually managed a rock band by the name of the Rockin' Foo. And he told his brother, hey, why don't you just take like a break from college and, come travel with us and be a roadie for this band? And so Phil did. And wow, what a great decision that was. Like, not only did Phil like travel all over and get to meet cool people, he got to meet legends such as Jimi Hendrix and Janis Joplin. Like, what? Like, that's just, so he's just living his best life right now. In around the same time, in 1970, he met and married his first wife, a young lady by the name of Gretchen Lewis. And, the couple was described as, sort of being that, like, that stereotypical young couple in love, right? Like, they didn't have a lot of material possessions. They lived in a small apartment, but, they had each other, and they had love. That's kind of how they were described. However, as the relationship, grew, as the marriage progressed, Gretchen started noticing that Phil, would pull back a little bit emotionally. There was this small piece of Phil that just no one could really access. He kind of, pulled it back, right? And, when you're trying to build a relationship with someone, particularly an intimate, long-term relationship, a marriage, that doesn't really bode well, right? Like, when you're with someone, you want to know that you can be, intimate and vulnerable. And I'm not talking about just, physicality-wise, right? Like, physically. I'm talking about, emotionally. You want to know that you can, really be vulnerable and open with this person. But, Phil just kind of had a hard time opening up that part of himself. And friends would actually say that Phil, he fell in love easily, but he always had trouble sort of maintaining it, So, as you can guess, this didn't really bode well for the relationship, and the couple ended up divorced in 1972. But that same year, Phil decided to, go back to school, so good for him. He attended the California State University campus of Northridge, and there he majored and studied graphic design. Remember, Phil was very artistic, very gifted, and he actually ended up opening up his own small graphic design business, and he was pretty successful at it. He designed lots of album covers for lots of bands, such as Poco in America, and he actually even helped redesign the logo for Crosby, Stills and Nash. So, he was doing all right. He was pretty successful at what he was doing. However, as the years pass and, as he does his business, Phil he realizes that he needs a little bit more of like a social outlet for his talents, right? Like a lot of artistic work, right? It's kind of solitary by nature. You just kind of sit there and go on your program or canvas, whatever it is that you're using, right? And so, he would entertain himself by, doing funny voices and, coming up with, funny characters in his head when he worked on his own. And, by 1975, he was like, you know what? I need something more social for, an outlet, So he decided to attend night comedy classes that were being put on by a relatively new improv group based in California. This group was called the Groundlings. Now, one night, the Groundlings were doing a performance. It was like a skit / performance, and it was one of those performances that sort of included the audience a little bit, right? And so Phil took this time to just go for it. He just went for it. He got up and just started being in the skit with them, and he was just so bombastic, so enthusiastic, so funny, and he just fit right in that they were impressed. They were very impressed with Phil, and they said, hey, why don't you come work with us? And so he did. He designed merchandise for them, he redesigned their logo, and in 1979, after paying his dues for a few years working with the group, he became an official member of the Groundlings. And he would actually end up becoming one of their more successful members. Other successful stars that came from the Groundlings include comedians like Sherry O'Terry and Will Ferrell. So, yeah, they've churned out quite a bit of talent. Now, while he gained an in into the Groundlings, he was also doing some film work at this time. He was getting his first on-screen appearance ever, and it came in a film. It was a 1978 Australian film called Stunt Rock, and in 79, he made his first television debut in the popular dating program, The Dating Game. And Phil actually won the date with the girl, which I'm not really shocked, right? I don't know about you, but I've always been the one to kind of fall for the funny guy, and he was super funny in it. I saw clips of him on the show, and yeah, he's just so funny. But even though he won, he did not get a chance to go on the date with the girl. For some reason, she missed the date. I don't know what reason. I never found that out. But yeah, so she missed the date even though he won. Now, while with the Groundlings, Phil becomes good friends with another performer you might be familiar with, a young man by the name of Paul Reubens. And him and Phil were really good friends, and they collaborated on a lot of material together. They came up with all kinds of skits and characters, including one you may be familiar with, a little-known character by the name of Pee Wee Herman. They developed a comedy show for it called The Pee Wee Herman Show, and it actually aired on HBO in 1981. And in it, Phil played the character of Captain Carl, a role he would reprise in the television adaptation Pee-wee's Playhouse. It was so successful on HBO that it spurned its own television series, and that was so successful that it spurned a major film, Pee-wee's Big Adventure in 1985, which Phil co-wrote and had a cameo in as a reporter. So, around this time, doors are opening for Phil, right? Pee Wee Herman is super successful, and during this time, through the early half of the 80s when this was happening, he had actually contemplating dropping out of acting altogether. you see, he was getting like little small bit parts in sort of like B movies, you know, stuff like Cheech and Chong's next movie, the Gong Show movie. And it just, yeah, he just wasn't getting what he wanted. And he actually had contemplated just kind of like dropping out of acting altogether. However, the success of Pee Wee Herman, you know, like I said, opened new doors and opportunities for him. So he did stick with acting. Now, ultimately, Phil would leave the Pee Wee Herman project due to, quote, creative differences with Paul Rubens. I'm not sure what that is. That's sort of like a generic term in the industry that basically says, like, they just couldn't agree. And, you know, so they parted ways. I don't know if they parted ways, like, as enemies or if it was amicable. I couldn't find anything about, you know, that because, you know, they were good friends. Just that he departed from the Pee Wee Herman projects and went on to do his own stuff. So, okay. Now, also around this time, when, you know, Pee Wee Herman is making it big, in 1982, Phil met and married his second wife, Lisa Strain, who now goes by Lisa Jarvis. And sort of the same thing that he did with Gretchen, Phil kind of exhibited the same behavior with Lisa. This part of him that would, like, emotionally pull back, that, like, no one could really access. This was something that he exhibited in all of the romantic relationships in his life. So Lisa described Phil, she had done some interviews describing her marriage to him, and, you know, she described him as, quote, emotionally reclusive, saying that he, quote, would disappear emotionally, and that kind of passivity made you crazy. She, you know, also talked about how he would, like, disappear into his own world, and, you know, just kind of talking about what I was talking about, that part of him that you just couldn't reach. She described an incident that happened on their first wedding anniversary. So, you know, they're at a hotel, and, you know, Phil's on the bed reading a book, and Lisa does, you know, what I think a lot of wives would do on a wedding anniversary, and you're in a nice hotel. She, you know, gets all dressed up all sexy in, like, some lingerie, you know, trying to start some sexy time with her hubby. And so she, you know, gets all sexy and goes on the bed and stands over him, you know, like all, you know, seductive, like, right? You know, trying to get something started. But I guess Phil responded by taking off his glasses, sighing, and just saying, "Must you?" Oh, to which Lisa was like, "No," and she crawled off him and put on a robe and, like, just read a book. That's what she said in the interview. Like, oh, that's so devastating. I can't imagine the level of... I don't even know. I don't even know. Like, that would just crush my self-esteem. And yeah, she said it was, you know, it was really painful. And, you know, as you can guess, this didn't really bode well for their marriage. And the couple ultimately divorced in 1985. But they did remain friends. Like, it did seem like it was amicable. So, you know, they did remain friends. So, yeah, they divorce in 1985. And in 1986, Phil starts taking on more work. He had some more film roles in films such as Jumpin' Jack Flash. And he also started doing voiceover work. He added voiceover work to his resume. He did voices for popular shows such as The 13 Ghosts of Scooby-Doo and Dennis the Menace, both of which, oh yeah, I watched those as a kid. Did you? Let me know. But Phil's really big break would come in 1986 when he successfully auditioned for a little-known variety program called Saturday Night Live. He joined in the show's 12th season, and this would actually mark a new golden era in the show's history, okay? For a few years up to this point, the show was really flailing in the ratings, like people were wondering if it was going to be canceled. But Phil joined right at the time where it would mark a new golden era in the show's history, like I said. He sent in an audition tape, and the producers loved it. And he was also highly recommended by castmates and good friends, John Lovitz and Lorraine Newman. So yeah, that was his really big break, getting on Saturday Night Live. And while he was on there for 8 seasons. And while he was on there, he garnered a reputation for, you know, just being a really big talent, being able to do many impressions, his most famous being that of former President Bill Clinton. And he was described as, quote, the glue that held the show together, okay? They described Phil as just being a sweet, talented guy. He could be like the star of a skit, or even like the secondary in the skit. Like, even if he wasn't the one getting all the laughs, he just was such a sweetheart, just wanted everyone to succeed and have a good time. And Lorne Michaels even described Phil as the kind of glue that held the show together, describing him as someone who demanded very little but gave so much. Now, Phil has said that he did SNL because, he wanted to do stuff for his own. He is quoted as saying, quote, "I wanted to do SNL because I wanted to get the exposure that would give me box office credibility so I could do projects for myself." Which, isn't terribly uncommon in the industry, right? Like, usually you pay your dues, you get whatever work you can get, and it's in the hopes that you can build a foundation and get a reputation and prove that you can make your own work, and that people will see it. So that was sort of like Phil's goal. And like I said, he was just such a sweetheart on the show, described as the glue that held the cast together. He even helped a current cast member when he was on, Jan Hooks, overcome her stage fright. She had really bad stage fright, and so Phil really helped her out with that. And the two were actually cast very often as husband and wife because they had such great on-screen chemistry together. They were so funny and people loved them. Now, some cast members felt that Phil sort of went unappreciated in his day on SNL, they felt like the mainstream press and even mass audiences didn't really appreciate the talent it took to be on multiple skits on that show and, at the same time, be funny, write them, do all these impressions that were just spot on. But, Phil would be appreciated, at least for his writing skills, when he won a Primetime Emmy for his writing on SNL. In 1989, he won a Primetime Emmy for Outstanding Writing in a Variety, Music, or Comedy program. And he was actually nominated for the same award in 1987, and then he was nominated for his individual performance on SNL in 1994. But he lost that to, I believe, David Hyde Pierce, who was Niles on Frasier. Now, also in 1986 was a big year for Phil Hartman. And I just kind of wanted to add this little tidbit on. So in 1986, he started, he successfully auditioned for SNL, and he also started writing a screenplay for his own movie. Remember, he wanted to do his own work, and so he had lots of screenplays that he wrote. One of which was one that he completed in 1991, and it was called Mr. Fix-It. Now, Phil described this movie as, quote, a sort of merger between comedy and horror, like Beetlejuice, not Beetlejuice, or Throw Mama from the Train. It's an American nightmare about a family torn asunder. They live next to a toxic dump site. Their water supply is poisoned. The mother and son go insane and try and kill each other. And the father's face is ripped off in a horrific accident all in the first act. But it's heavy stuff, but it has a, quote, good, positive, upbeat ending, according to Phil. And so he's really excited about this. And he actually got Robert Zemeckis to sign on to produce it, but unfortunately, even he couldn't get studio backing, and so it never went anywhere. But I just wanted to add that in because that sounds like a super cool movie. I love horror comedy. It's one of my favorite genres, and I don't know, I just think it would be awesome if that movie got made, so I just wanted to include it. Now, not only was 1986 a big break in Phil's career, it was also his big break in love. I can talk, I promise. In 1986, he was introduced to who would be his third wife, Brynn Omdell, on a blind date. Now, who is Brynn Omdell? Well, let me tell you. Brynn Omdell was actually born Vicky Jo Omdell, and she was born on April 11th, 1958, in Thief River Falls, Minnesota. Thief River Falls. Isn't that such a cool name for a town? I would love to know the history behind the name of that. But anyway, So, yeah, she's born in 1958 in Thief River Falls, Minnesota. And her parents are Donald Jean Omdell, who is an engineer and a partner in a popular restaurant called The Lantern. Her mother is Constance Faye Omdell, and she ran a boutique store in town. So Brynn also had a couple sisters and a brother. She had two sisters by the name of Catherine Kelly Omdell Wright and Debbie Omdell Borison. And her brother's name was Gregory Clark Omdell. And yeah, she came from a very small town. Thief River Falls is a very small town. And yeah, her brother and others have described her as just, being fun-loving, being, quote, the instigator of fun. She's a bit of a troublemaker, but, in a good way. As someone who was also born and raised in small towns, I get that. Sometimes you gotta make your own fun, and sometimes that causes trouble. Nothing serious, though, right? Her brother has said that she played piano, had lots of friends. She attended Lincoln High School. And like I said, she was just kind of like your average, normal small town high school girl. But like some small town people, Brynn, she wanted more out of life. She just thought there was more to life than just this small town that she was in, right? So to that end, she dropped out of high school and in 1977 married her first husband, a young man by the name of Douglas Torfin, who was a telephone operator. But they weren't together for very long, and the couple divorced 2 years later. She went to Minneapolis, where she was actually mildly successful in some modeling work. Yeah, so she got some modeling work in Minneapolis, and, that kind of inspired her to, go out west and try and make it as an actress and a model. She moved out to LA, enrolled in acting classes, and even auditioned to be a cornstalk girl on the show Hee Haw. I don't know much about Hee Haw. That was a little before my time. Now, according to a friend who had known Brynn since she was about 18, she described Brynn as, being one of those people that is always trying to find themselves, right? Always trying to find their place in the world. And she said Brynn was definitely one of those people. And to that end, she, went through some name changes. So she was born Vicky Jo Omdell. She then went by Vicky, and then Brendan, before finally settling on Brynn. Now, when Brynn got to Hollywood, she was kind of successful when she first got here. She got some modeling gigs, and she even dated some, famous men, including Rob Reiner. So, she was kind of living the Hollywood life a little bit. She was going to the parties, meeting A-list celebs, and unfortunately, she kind of fell into that trap that a lot of people who come out west in search of stardom in Hollywood suffer from. She ended up suffering from addiction. She ended up becoming addicted to cocaine. And, there's a reason why that's sort of like a cliche, right? Where small town girl or small town person goes to Hollywood and ends up, with the bad crowd, to make it in Hollywood, remember, most of it is your connections. It's not necessarily your talent. It's who you know. And so, to that end, you attend these parties. You never know who's going to be there, the next producer or director or maybe a fellow actor who can recommend you for a job. You got to make those connections, right? And so it's, really easy for some people to just kind of get sucked up into the booze and the drugs that are inevitably all around those kind of parties. And yeah, so Brynn was kind of struggling with that a little bit. She had gone to rehab to try and get a handle on her addiction before she had met Phil on their blind date. Now, when she met Phil, it is said that Phil fell hard and fast. It was like love at first sight. She was this gorgeous, tall, blonde model that, he never thought he could get a woman like that. And so he immediately fell in love. And the two just clicked and got along, and so they married in 1987 and ended up having 2 children, a son named Sean, who was born in 1989, and a daughter named Bergen, who was born in 1992. And while Phil was at SNL, the family was kind of bi-coastal. They spent some of their time in New York City when he was on SNL, and some of their time in Los Angeles where he was doing other work. And when he was at SNL, Brynn would come down and, see him and, talk to, his castmates and, like, the producers and writers, right? Like, remember, Brynn still wants to try to make it in Hollywood herself, right? And so when your husband has this, like, really fat connection at SNL, yeah, you're probably going to go down there and try to make some connections yourself, right? A cast member who worked with Phil, a comedian by the name of Julia Sweeney, she described Brynn as not being one of those people who fade into the background. She very much wanted to take charge, wanted to be in the spotlight. And to that end, she would wear like really bright colors. She would wear like these short skirts that really accentuated her long, beautiful legs. And she would even like playfully flirt and stuff with like some of the writers, even like sitting in their laps, all like, cute and flirty. But this was all in front of Phil. Like there wasn't anything like scandalous going on. She was just kind of, trying to make those connections. And it is said that Phil just didn't really care. Like, he actually kind of, like, enjoyed this, like, it didn't really ruffle his feathers at all. Now, by 1993, most of the cast members that Phil had started on SNL with, they had moved on, which, is kind of per the usual on Saturday Night Live. You got your people who were there for a certain amount of time, and then they go on to do their own thing. And at this time, so his old cast members are kind of gone by this time, and newer, younger, more physical comedians, such as Adam Sandler and Chris Farley, they were sort of filling the ranks. And, as such, Phil just felt like his type of comedy, it just didn't, like, mesh well with the younger comedians' more physical comedy. More often than not, he was relegated to being sort of like the straight man to, like, the wacky shenanigans that they were doing. And so he ultimately left the show in 1994. Now, he wanted to leave earlier in 1991, but showrunner Lorne Michaels had talked him into staying in order to sort of like raise his profile just a little bit more before he started out on his own, And it's a good thing he did, because this is around the time where he develops probably his most famous popular impression of now former President Bill Clinton. And Phil's impression of Bill Clinton was so popular, so funny, that he actually made the late night talk show rounds as Bill Clinton. And he had impressed Jay Leno so much that Jay wanted Phil to be a sidekick on his show. Now, I was confused on whether he wanted like Phil Hartman as the sidekick, or if he wanted Phil as Bill Clinton. I was a little unclear about that, but, regardless, he impressed Jay Leno with his impression, and Jay Leno wanted him. But he ultimately declined, saying that, he was going to stay with SNL, and that NBC was actually going to give him his own variety program called The Phil Show. And The Phil Show was going to have Phil not just be the star, but also be the head writer and executive producer. And so, he decided to stay on SNL with the promise that he'd be getting his own variety show. However, before the show could really get off the ground, like get past the pre-production stage, NBC decided that variety shows really weren't all that popular. It wasn't like a big ratings hit, and so it was ultimately canceled. So after leaving SNL in 1994, the family permanently moves out west into Los Angeles, and Phil gets his next gig. It is on a sitcom called NewsRadio, and oh my gosh, I really enjoy this show. I think it's super funny. It's super 90s, and it's just a lot of fun. It's about the day in the life of a radio station, and you can actually see like young stars before they made it super big, such as like Andy Dick, Joe Rogan, Stephen Root. You can see all these young stars on that show, and it's just kind of like funny to see them. Phil played the role of Bill McNeil, and Bill McNeil was a super arrogant, sort of like dick of a character who was a news anchor. Phil went on to describe the character of Bill as himself, but with, quote, any ethics or character removed. And yeah, he's hilarious. And if you've never watched NewsRadio, I highly recommend checking out some episodes. Like it's just really funny. Phil is really, really funny as Bill McNeil. He's such a dick, and he's so good. Now, at this time, Phil, he's making some pretty good money, all right? Like, he wasn't exactly hurting before on SNL, right? But for NewsRadio, he was getting paid $50,000 an episode. And in 2020 currency, that's over $84,000. So that's per episode, by the way. And remember, this is a primetime network television show, which means that there was, anywhere from like 22 to 24 episodes per season, and he's getting paid 50 G's an episode, which again is equivalent to over $84,000 today. So he is doing really well right now. Now, Phil would end up going on 4 seasons of the show, of NewsRadio, and it was always one of those shows that, like, always seemed to be on the verge of cancellation, Always one of those shows where, like, when you started watching it, you're just like, oh my god, is this going to be the last season? Is it going to be renewed? And at first, Phil, like, blamed NBC for this, saying that, like, it was their fault the show wasn't really, like, catching a concrete audience because, like, NBC kept moving the show around, different time slots, different days of the week, which, to be fair, that can be a death blow for a lot of shows. But ultimately, Phil would kind of retract that statement and just kind of say, you know what? If NewsRadio gets canceled, that's just going to open up even more opportunities for me. So he was cool with it. Now, the show would end up getting renewed for a 5th season. However, Phil would not live to begin production on it. So while Phil was doing SNL and then, NewsRadio, in between all that time, he was also lending his voiceover talents to The Simpsons. His 2 most popular reoccurring characters being, of course, sleazy scumbag lawyer Lionel Hutz and washed-up B-list movie actor Troy McClure. And Phil loved voicing Troy McClure. He loved it so much that he actually wanted to make a live-action adaptation movie from Troy McClure. He was really gung-ho about this, saying, like, he would even go so far as to buying the rights to the character himself if he had to. But that probably wasn't going to be necessary because there was a lot of writers on The Simpsons who were totally behind him 100% and wanted to help him with that. And yeah, it's kind of a shame we never got that. Now, on top of doing, like, The Simpsons voiceover work, Phil was also, again, doing the late-night talk show rounds. He was specifically on David Letterman quite a lot. It said David Letterman was quite the fan of Phil. Just knew he could rely on him, knew Phil would be on his A-game every time. He was also doing, other late-night shows, such as, like, the John Larroquette Show. He was making guest appearances on other television programs, such as Third Rock from the Sun. And on top of that, he started doing commercials and other voiceover ads for products such as Cheetos and McDonald's. I believe he got paid over $1 million for the McDonald's commercial. And friends were saying that, like, Phil just couldn't believe he was getting paid this much money for, like, doing something so ridiculous, He just couldn't believe it. As if that wasn't enough. So we've got television work, we've got voiceover work, we've got commercials. What's missing? Oh yeah, film, which Phil was doing. He got his first starring role in the Sinbad-led film Houseguest, which came out in 1995. And he actually went on to have pretty good roles in other movies, such as Sergeant Bilko, Three Amigos, So I Married an Axe Murderer, Kiki All the Way, Jingle All the Way, and Kiki's Delivery Service. Good Lord. And his last on-screen film appearance would be in the movie Small Soldiers, which he would not live to see debuted in theaters, unfortunately. Now, throughout, most of his big breaks in his career, Brynn was right there by Phil's side. His big break came on SNL in '86 when he met Brynn. And yeah, they'd gotten married, had 2 kids. And, remember, Brynn was trying to make a career for herself as well. She was trying to be an actress herself. But it unfortunately was not going that well for her. Like, for as well as Phil's career was going, Brynn's was like the total opposite. She just could not get any roles, and more often than not, she stayed at home with the kids. Now, Phil did try to get Brynn work. Friend said that he did try, and you can actually see, like, him walking down the red carpet or, like, doing a film, like, doing a premiere or something, and he's trying to like put Brynn out there, like, hey, this is my wife, Brynn Hartman, Brynn, and stuff like that, so you can see it. And when he did his interview on Howard Stern, Phil even brought Brynn on along with him, and she did the interview with him, so you can see proof of him trying to get her work. But yeah, it just wasn't happening for her. Her most notable roles came in a one-line speaking role in an Elijah Wood movie called North. And then she got to be on an episode of Third Rock from the Sun where she played a Venetian. And that was kind of like her most notable roles. She can be seen in the Saturday Night Live credits. The back of her head can be seen. So if you haven't watched Saturday Night Live, so the announcer goes, it's Saturday Night Live starring, and then like each cast member, gets their own little title card where they do something, silly or cheesy to the camera or something. So, Phil's was supposed to be, he's talking to a woman at a diner, the back of her head is to the camera, and then, when it says Phil Hartman, he looks at the camera and, does his little dashing smile and, says Phil Hartman. Well, that woman is Brynn, and if you notice, if you pay careful attention, you can see the earrings that she's wearing, they're dangling wildly, like they're going to town. And that is because Brynn kept trying to cheat towards camera to get her face on there a little bit, and like the director had to keep like sort of like chastising her, and it's just like, no, just stare at your husband, stare at Phil. And like it is said that like the whole experience was just really frustrating for her, which again, I mean, I don't think I blame her too much for trying to cheat on camera a little bit. She's trying to add stuff to her reel and resume, but still, like, when a director tells you a direction, it's best to just like keep it, So, with Phil, being successful and, Brynn not so much, it didn't take long for Brynn to start feeling, like intimidated by her husband's success. And again, Phil did attempt to get her work, even when they were developing the Phil show. Remember that variety show that ultimately didn't go anywhere? Well, when they were developing it, and Phil was talking to some of the other writers, they were talking about how they wanted his former SNL co-star, Jan Hooks, the one that he helped overcome stage fright. They wanted her to play his on-screen wife because, like I said before, they just had really good chemistry together, and, they thought she would make a great addition to the show. But it is said that Phil put his foot down and insisted that Brynn be his on-screen wife. And, the writers were sort of taken aback. They're like, okay, is she funny? To which I guess Phil responded in her own way, which, kind of made the writers nervous. But remember, ultimately, it didn't go anywhere. And there was also a sitcom at one point that Phil was developing that, again, didn't even make it to the pilot stage before it was canceled, which, by the way, happens to a lot of productions. Like, you have no idea. So yeah, this was, understandably frustrating and upset for Brynn. Every time she thought she would have an in or something, something would happen and, she wouldn't. Now, according to Gregg, Brynn's brother, she would call him sometimes, just to vent, like you do with family. And, she would say that, she was frustrated with Phil at times because, like, he'd be reassuring her, like, oh, I can get you a role on, with The Simpsons, or maybe I can get you a role in NewsRadio. And then she, I guess, when she would ask him about it, when he would get home, he would just sort of like, kind of shrug it off and be like, oh, sorry, like, I forgot. That's what Brynn was telling her brother. Now, I'm not sure if Phil was doing, like, if he was doing this. I don't know if he just thought Brynn couldn't, like, make it or what. Like, because he has been reported as confiding in friends that he didn't think Brynn had what it took to make it. And let's remember, right? Like, when you're recommending someone for a job, any job, it's sort of like your reputation and, your kind of word on the line too. By the way, I'm sorry if you can hear the audio. My neighbors are having a car towed, and so sorry if you hear some wonky audio. That's what it is. So yeah, anyway, so I'm not sure if Phil just like didn't think Brynn was like all that talented and just didn't want to, kind of mess up his reputation. I'm not sure. Or if he just genuinely forgot. I don't know. I'm not sure. Now, it is said that Brynn, she was really insecure, and she had problems with anxiety. As someone who suffers from anxiety on a daily basis, I totally empathize. I totally get you. And, as such, she was insecure and suffered with anxiety, whereas, Phil was sort of the opposite of that. He was outgoing, he was funny, his career was on the rise. And so, a perfect incident that, like, really demonstrates their two different sort of, like, temperaments and mentalities around this time is when their first child, Sean, was born. So, Sean was born, and Lisa, remember, Phil's second wife, Lisa, who he had divorced, but, they'd maintained a friendship, she sent the couple a congratulatory note, and just kind of said your typical thing that you would expect the note to say, like, oh, I'm so happy for you. You guys are so beautiful. I hope you guys are super, super happy and love being parents. If you ever want any time alone, I am more than happy and excited to babysit. Just kind of that, love Aunt Lisa, XOXO, so super sweet, right? Well, Brynn sent Lisa back a 2-page letter in response. And in this letter, it was just filled with vitriol and hate and death threats. Brynn telling Lisa to, like, stay away from her family, stay away from her son, stay away from her husband, or, she would, quote, be sorry. Just stuff like that. Which, of course, Lisa was like, whoa, what the F? Like, completely blindsided by it, as I think any of us would be, right? So, she gets a hold of Phil, and she's like, yo, dude, like, are you aware of this letter that your wife sent me? Like, what's up with this? To which I guess Phil is said to have replied, should have seen the letter she wanted to send you. Yikes. Like, what? Like, no. And so after that point, Phil just completely ended the friendship with Lisa. Brynn did not want him being friends with her, and so he actually went out of contact with her for several years. He would eventually reestablish the friendship with Lisa behind Brynn's back. He would sneak over to her house and, they just hang out as friends do. There wasn't anything, like, there was no affair or anything like that going on. They were just, like, really good friends, and Phil liked having her to talk to. Now, when the family permanently relocated to Los Angeles, when Phil left SNL, they bought a gorgeous house in Encino, which is just a posh, upper-class, neighborhood of Southern California. And, the same pattern that they had when Phil was on SNL sort of followed them out to LA, right? Where Phil was getting work and Brynn wasn't really having that much luck. And so, this caused, like, tension. Brynn thought Phil was not home enough because not only was Phil absent, when he was working, he was also absent on his free time because he really enjoyed his hobbies, which were piloting and boating. So he had gotten himself like a nice little plane and a nice boat, and his favorite place to fly to and boat to was Catalina Island, which is a small little quaint island off the coast of Southern California. It's real fun. Like, you should totally go and visit it if you ever get the chance. It's just a short ferry ride. It's not very long, and it's just a cute, quaint little island. Phil's favorite spot was Emerald Bay, and so Brynn kind of felt that like Phil wasn't as home as much as he should be. She's not getting work, so more often than not, she's at home with the kids, and he's off, whether he's doing work on a movie or TV show or commercial, and going off and playing on his boat and plane, which, I get, right? Like, I can see both sides of it, where it's like, it's important for a couple to have their own, like, individual hobbies, individual lives, like, away from each other. That's healthy. But at the same time, like, when you have kids and stuff and one parent is kind of taking on more of the parenting role than the other one, it's like, maybe you shouldn't be going out as often, So, like, I can definitely see both sides here. So as Phil is, absent from home and Brynn's at home, she's kind of drowning in her insecurities and her anxiety. It gets bad to the point where she even gets, like, some minor plastic surgery done because, like, friends said that she felt this, like, intense pressure to be that, like, this hot Hollywood wife, whose husband is a successful actor. And, to that end, she, had some plastic surgery done. Of course, all of these insecurities was compounded by the fact that she just wasn't getting work and Phil was, So, as you can probably guess, this whole situation did not help Brynn's addiction. She was described as, like, she'd go through bouts of being clean, and then she would, like, indulge one night or one day and then just fall off the wagon. A writer on SNL described how one time she walked into the restroom and Brynn was doing a line of Coke off of the counter, and she offered the writer some, so she was generous, which the writer declined. And, she said in an interview that she didn't really, like, think anything of it at the time, She was like, I didn't think that she had an addiction or any problem, Like, it's the industry, right? And it's SNL, and I'm sure she's walked into a lot more bizarre things in the restroom, right? So, no one really knew that Brynn was suffering with this addiction, really. And there was an incident described that I guess was supposed to have happened on Mother's Day in 1997. So, allegedly, Brynn went out and, celebrated the holiday a little bit too much, and she came home just, like, I guess, trashed. I read that she had consumed a lot of alcohol. I don't know anything about cocaine or drugs. I didn't read that, but it was just alcohol. And, she came home really trashed. I don't know if it was like one of those things where you're still drunk or just massively hungover. But she arrived home still trashed. And I guess this, like, really, really upset Phil. He wanted her to go to rehab. He had vented to a friend once that, like, he could not be with someone who didn't know how to control their drugs and alcohol. And so, tensions were there in the relationship, unfortunately. And, due to all this, they, of course, they fought. And, they would... I guess that this was sort of like their cycle. They'd fight and make up over and over and over. I feel like we've all known some couples like that, right? Now, while Phil was, like, more mellow and laid back when they would fight, Brynn was sort of the opposite. So, more often than not, when they fought, Phil would, like, just, like, go to bed. Or, like, just otherwise physically remove himself from the situation until Brynn calmed down. Brynn, however, she was kind of the opposite. she was very volatile. She was very angry. She lashed out a lot. And so that was sort of like the nature of their fights. A makeup artist who worked at SNL described one time how he accidentally overheard one of the couple's fights. He was walking by Phil's dressing room and overheard them through the closed door. And later on, when he had Phil in the chair, he was just kind of talking to him like, hey man, how you doing? You know, you doing okay? And I guess Phil just sort of like vented to him a little bit, just about how like, yeah, you know, Brynn's upset. You know, she's saying I'm not home a lot, but I don't understand what her problem is. Like, I'm the one out here being the breadwinner and this, that, and the other. And so, you know, there were definitely witnesses to some of their fights and some of their problems. Now, Brynn, she also had a small gun collection, and she said she collected guns to feel safe. Now, you might be asking, like, you live in a mansion in a posh neighborhood in Encino, like, what do you mean to feel safe? And remember, Brynn's also suffering from anxiety, which increases your paranoia, and it lies to you. So Brynn told friends that she was like, you know, oh, I don't know, worried about being robbed or like some crazy fan coming through. You know, from her perspective, she was like this woman in this big empty house alone with 2 young children, and she just wanted to feel safe. That was Brynn's line of thinking. Okay, sorry, I cannot put on my eyelashes on camera. I really don't know how like Danielle does it in like one swoop, but that's not me. So anyway. So yeah, Brynn's suffering from, like, struggling with her addiction, suffering from anxiety, paranoia. She has a small gun collection. So, you know, despite the tensions in the marriage, you know, it seemed like neither one of them wanted the marriage to end. Like, there was still some love there. You know what I mean? It is said that Phil did not want to be a, quote, 3-time loser in love. He really wanted to make this marriage work. He wanted to keep his family together. A waitress who worked at a restaurant that Phil frequented on Catalina Island, her name's Debbie, she talked about how, like, Phil would describe his, like, quote, 3-year plan, to where he would actually sort of, like, semi-retire or, like, pull back on his career a little bit so he could be home with Brynn. And, you know, according to him, if Brynn could just hold on for a few more years, they'd be able to spend all the time in the world together. And so that was sort of like where Phil was at. And, you know, Brynn, she also wanted the marriage to work. You know, this was the father of her children. He's a successful actor, which, you know, like, if nothing else, you know, has like a nice lifestyle. And, you know, she wanted to keep her family together. She wanted her children to have like 2 parents. And so, you know, she had even like booked her and Phil some luxurious massages at a very fancy spa just a few days before the events of today's case. So it's not like divorce was seriously being considered at this time. They still wanted to be together, you know? There was still some love there. In the days leading up to the events of today's case, friends said that Phil described him and Brynn as, quote, doing as good as we ever were. Brynn's brother, Gregory, said that they were not fighting or bickering with each other in the weeks and days leading up to the events of today's case. Other friends of Phil said that he had sort of confided in them that Brynn had been pushing the alcohol and drugs lately, and that, like, it was getting to a boiling point. So, like, looks like there was, like, lots of different conflicting emotions going on in the days leading up to today's case as far as their marriage and them as a couple were concerned. So, Wednesday, May 27th, 1998. Around 7:30, Brynn is out to dinner with a friend by the name of Christine Zander. She is a writer on Third Rock from the Sun at this time. And over the course of the dinner, Christine said, you know, Brynn seemed to be in a good mood, relatively speaking. She nursed 2 Cosmos. She was venting about her marriage to Christine a little bit, sort of, you know, how you do with girlfriends. She just kind of talked about how she felt unwanted, unneeded, unappreciated. She said that she, you know, felt like Phil didn't really care about her career aspirations or wants or needs, that he just wanted, you know, someone at home to take care of the children and someone like pretty on his arm. Christine said that she left dinner twice. And both times that she left, she came back, and Brynn was on the payphone with someone. Remember, kids, this is 1998, so there ain't no smartphones, and there certainly are not cell phones. At least they're not as ubiquitous as they are today. So you wanted to get a hold of someone, you called them on the payphone. So anyway, Christine said both times when she came back, Brynn was on the payphone, and she looked agitated. She just looked kind of like irritated and agitated. So we don't know who she was talking to or what they were talking about, but that's just what Christine said. So towards the end of the night, like around 10-ish, Christine leaves. Brynn wanted to keep the night going, but, Christine was just like, look, girl, I'm sorry. I'm tired. I need to go home and go to bed. Well, Brynn, she didn't want to go home yet, so she went ahead and drove over to a good friend and her former fiance's house, Ron Douglas. Now, I'm just going to stop right here and be like, I like how she is allowed to be friends with an ex-fiance, but Phil wasn't allowed to be friends with Lisa, his ex-wife. So, sorry, I just had to point that out. So, she shows up to Ron's house about 9:45, and kind of like what she did with Christine, she's just sort of, venting about her marriage. She had a couple beers, and was just kind of venting. So she leaves Ron's house about 1:45 in the morning and drives home. Sorry, it's hard to put on lip liner and talk at the same time, and it's hard to put on falsies and talk at the same time. Like, that's hard. Anyway, so Brynn heads home. And now no one knows what exactly transpired the fight. All we know is that Phil and Brynn had a really bad fight that night. I read one article. It was only one. I believe it was an LA Times article. And it came out like the day of or the day after the events of today's case take place. And they alleged that they fought over, I guess Brynn had allegedly accidentally physically hurt Bergen or something while she was under the influence, and Phil was threatening to divorce her if she didn't go to rehab. I tried finding other sources of information that kind of reported this, but none. All anyone would say is that we don't know what they fought about, just that they had a bad fight. And so Phil kind of did his, trademark move where he would just leave. He left the situation and went to bed. Now, Brynn, she was fuming. She was very upset. So at around 2 a.m., Thursday, May 28th, 1998, Brynn, while fuming, takes one of her guns from her collection, a .38 Smith & Wesson, and goes into the bedroom that she shares with Phil. And I read that she had also done some cocaine before entering the room as well. Phil was asleep on the bed in his t-shirt and boxers, and Brynn crawled into bed next to her husband and shot him 3 times in the head and chest, killing him instantly. Now, it is said that 9-year-old Sean, remember, 9-year-old Sean and 6-year-old Bergen are in the house at this point. It is said that 9-year-old Sean reported hearing what sounded like 3 slams of a door and a voice yelling, "Sorry, sorry, sorry." Yeah. So about an hour later, after consuming a little bit more alcohol, Brynn phones Ron, and she is distraught. She is just going on and on about how Phil is gone. They got into a fight, and he left her a note saying that, he was gonna leave or something, and, Ron, he's known Brynn for a while, right? And so, he thinks this is just kind of her having kind of one of their, her manic episodes, she'd, kind of be a little hysterical at times, and so he thought she was just kind of freaking out, so he tries to soothe her, hey, it's cool, Phil will be back, just go to bed, lay down, it'll all be better at the morning, you're just, drunk, it's cool. And about 20 minutes later, Brynn showed up on Ron's doorstep, clearly intoxicated, clearly hysterical. Now, I also read that she didn't call Ron first, that she just showed up at his doorstep. So, yeah, regardless, she's on Ron's doorstep at about 3:45 in the morning. She passes out at his house, wakes up, throws up from too much alcohol and cocaine, and as she sort of, getting better, getting it out of her system, she's crying about how she killed Phil and what did she do, and Ron is still not believing her at this point. Even after her gun falls out of her purse, he just thinks that she's sort of spiraling and just going off, not knowing what's going on. So, he just picks up her gun. This is we're just gonna put this over here, and he stashes it in the trunk of his car. Now, after some time, when Brynn has sobered up just a little bit, Ron agrees to come with her back to her house. He followed her in his own car, and she drove her own. And on the drive, she called a friend of hers by the name of Judy, and kind of like what she told Ron, confessed to what she did, that she had hurt Phil and that Phil was dead. Now, her friend actually took her a little bit more seriously and dashed to her house. But Ron and Brynn would show up first, so Ron follows Brynn into the house, follows her into the hallway, and then into the master bedroom, and it's not until he sees Phil's dead body on the bed that he realizes, oh my God, she actually did it. She actually murdered her husband. So he immediately steps outside of the master bedroom and gets on the phone to 911. Brynn, meanwhile, takes this opportunity to lock herself in the master bedroom. So she made lots of phone calls, one to a neighbor and friend by the name of, try to remember her name, Marcy Swartz Toscher. And Marcy's husband was the one who actually got Brynn on the phone. And I guess he entered the bedroom and was like, yo, I don't know what's going on, but Brynn needs you. She's freaking out, saying that Phil's dead. We need to get over there ASAP. And so they start running over there because they're really close neighbors. They're just a couple houses down. So Marcia said that as she approached the Hartman residence, she heard the most pitiful, anguished cries as she approached the house. I know. So at the same time as they're approaching the Hartman residence, the police are showing up because, remember, Ron was on the phone with the police. And so the police show up to the house just as Ron is leaving the house with Sean. And he tells them, hey, there's still a 6-year-old girl in there that you need to go get. So, he meets them out front, and they go into the house, and they find Bergen. She's in her room, under a blanket in the corner of her room, just super scared, understandably. And so as the police are escorting Bergen out of the house, that is when Brynn calls her sister, tells her sister to tell her children that she loves them. She crawls into the bed next to Phil's body, puts the gun to her mouth, and kills herself. Yeah, I know. Just heart-wrenching, right? And at the police station, a friend of the family showed up to see if they could maybe, take care of the kids and to see if they were okay. And so the police let them take the children to a playground that was across the street from the station. And, this friend said that, both kids were understandably in shock. 9-year-old Sean talked about how he was, just super sad that his mom wouldn't be able to take him to all of the cool places that she promised. And 6-year-old Bergen just said, they didn't know if she knew exactly what happened, but she knew that she wouldn't, quote, see mommy or daddy again. Ugh, doesn't that just break your heart? That's just so heart-wrenching. Now, toxicology reports would later find that Brynn's alcohol level was 0.12, and that there was also cocaine and the antidepressant Zoloft found in her system. About a year later, in 1999, Brynn's family filed a lawsuit against Pfizer, the makers of Zoloft, saying that, Zoloft had a hand in what she did. Her brother Gregg said that he filed the lawsuit because he felt the use of Zoloft, quote, caused my sister to not know what she was doing, and she shot her husband. And when she came out of it, she shot herself. The case was ultimately settled out of court for $100,000, which, come on, Pfizer blinks and makes that, right? And they admitted no wrongdoing and said that, quote, there is no medical or scientific evidence that Zoloft causes violent health or suicidal behavior. Now, Andy Dick was also partially blamed for this whole incident. He was particularly accused by Phil's good friend and former SNL co-star John Lovitz. I guess at a Christmas party, 1997, so the Christmas before this happened. The Hartmans were having a Christmas party at their house, and so all of the cast and crew of NewsRadio was there, including Andy Dick, and he said that Brynn and a friend approached him at the party and was like, hey man, do you have any cocaine? And which he did, and so he gave her some. And he says kind of the same thing that writer on SNL said, that he had no idea that Brynn struggled with substance abuse. No idea whatsoever, just thought, she wanted a little bit of cocaine, which, again, isn't really, all that uncommon in Hollywood, right? Now, anyway, I guess, I don't know if it was that night or shortly thereafter, but there was an incident where Brynn indulged in way too much cocaine. So much that, it actually scared her and Phil. That's how bad she had, almost OD'd. And so that was when Phil, I guess, put his foot down and was like, you need to go to rehab. And so she did, but she left after about 5 or 6 days, saying that she couldn't be away from her children that long. So anyway, one day, as Andy Dick is leaving the set of NewsRadio, Jon Lovitz calls him over, because Jon Lovitz had come on to the 5th and last season of NewsRadio, not to fill in, Phil's role as Bill, but just to come in and fill his role. And I guess he leaned over and told Andy Dick in his ear, I know you killed Phil Hartman. Yeah. So Andy Dick, vehemently denies this and is just like, what are you talking about? And Jon Lovitz then accuses Andy of giving Brynn the cocaine that made her, quote, fall off the wagon, fall off the wagon, kill Phil, go crazy and kill Phil. So, they kind of go back and forth with Andy saying, look, man, I am not to blame. I didn't even know she was an addict. And even if I did know, she would have gotten the cocaine from somewhere else. So you can't blame me. And Jon Lovitz just keep repeating the same thing, it's all your fault. And so, yeah, I think they might still be feuding to this day. There was an ABC documentary made about Phil Hartman a few years ago called The Last Days of Phil Hartman. And Andy Dick actually did an interview where he kind of reiterated everything that I just said, while Jon Lovitz decided not to comment. So yeah, just a big mess all the way around. Phil's ashes were scattered at Emerald Bay at Catalina Island, his favorite place, and in 2014 he was awarded with a Hollywood star on the Walk of Fame. Now, Sean and Bergen, they would end up being raised by Brynn's sister Catherine and her husband in Wisconsin, and their aunt and uncle even changed their last names so that they could have, a chance at having a relatively normal life despite everything, right? But it looks like they did. Sean is said to live in Northern California, and he works in the music industry, and he's also an artist. Bergen graduated from St. Thomas University and obtained a degree in journalism and mass communication from Minnesota University. She got married in Italy in 2018. She runs a business with her husband, and she's even shared some sentimental posts on her social media. For Father's Day in 2016, she posted a photo of her father and, dedicated the post to her, quote, dapper dad. And in 2017, on the anniversary of her parents' death, she posted a picture of some flowers with a really nice caption, so I'm going to look a little over here so I can read it exact. So it was a picture of flowers that she got, and she captioned it with, quote, normally I wouldn't address this day on social media, but I just wanted to thank everyone for all of the thoughtful messages and the beautiful flowers I've received this weekend. From friends, family, fans, it truly means the world to me, and my parents would be so happy to know that such a supportive community still exists for us after all these years. I don't know what else to say. I'm just so grateful. It's been a tough day, but I certainly don't feel alone. So thank you, with a little heart. And that is the sad, sad murder of Phil Hartman. And man, all true crime cases are sad, right? But this one it's just sad all the way around. I know when it first happened, they were painting, Brynn as this, spiteful, vengeance woman who was, jealous of her husband's career. And, while that was certainly, a part of it, I don't know. I feel like it was just a little more nuanced and complicated with that. I don't know. Maybe I'm being too too lighthearted on Brynn. I don't know. The whole thing just makes me sad. And so now I think I'm going to go watch some classic Simpsons episodes with Phil Hartman and try to get into a better mood. Let me know in the comments down below, were you a fan of Phil Hartman? Were you around when his murder happened? And if you were, how old were you? I want to know how many old people are out there along with me. Until then, until next time, I guess I should say, I will see you later. I hope you take care of yourself out there. Don't be a dick. And hopefully I'll see you around next time. Bye-bye.